Curtis, at 34 years old, and with a steady salary of $49,000 a year as a city bus mechanic, sat at a table that cost more than his car. The restaurant was a glittering jewel on Philadelphia's main line, a place called Vernick Table, all polished marble and soft, expensive light. Each place setting was an arsenal of gleaming silverware. He was wearing his best suit, a charcoal gray number from J.C. Penney, that had set him back $189 2 years ago for a cousin's wedding. It felt tight in the shoulders. Across from him, his wife Danica was a vision in a deep blue dress that shimmered like a captured night sky. He knew for a fact it was a $1,700 Roland Mouret because he'd seen the credit card bill he was still paying off. Her father, Vernon, a man whose posture was as starched as his shirts, raised a delicate, long-stemmed glass of wine. The bottle of Sancerre on the table had cost $180, a sum Curtis mentally translated into 4 overtime hours, fixing a busted transmission on a Route 23 bus. Next to Danica sat Richard, a man introduced just an hour before as her mentor from the law firm that had just offered her a position. Richard was handsome, with an easy smile and a $4,000 Zegna suit that draped perfectly over his athletic frame. To Danica, Vernon began, his voice smooth and deep, carrying across the low hum of the restaurant. My brilliant daughter, a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School with honors. She set a goal, and she achieved it with grace and intelligence. It's a profound joy, he paused, letting his gaze drift from his glowing daughter to Curtis, to have one finished product in the family. The air thickened. The words hung there, suspended in the soft light. Danica's smile tightened, a flicker of something, annoyance, embarrassment, in her eyes before it was gone. Richard took a polite sip of his wine, his eyes carefully neutral. Vernon then looked directly at Curtis, offering a thin, dismissive smile. No offense, son. Some people are just unfinished. The word landed like a stone in a quiet pool. Unfinished. It wasn't shouted. It was delivered with the casual, offhand cruelty of a man who had never once in his life worried about the price of a bottle of wine. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts, a decade of dismissive glances and condescending remarks. Curtis looked at the man who had just summed up his entire life, his sacrifices, his unending labor, in a single, damning word. He looked at his wife, who said nothing, her silence a ringing endorsement. He felt a strange calm settle over him, a clarity so sharp and cold it was almost painful. The tension in his shoulders from the too-tight suit jacket seemed to dissolve. He looked down at his plate, at the artfully arranged piece of sea bass that probably cost $50. He picked up his fork, a heavy, ornate piece of silver worth more than the tools in his pocket. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then, with a quiet, deliberate motion, he placed the fork down beside his plate. The faint clink of metal on fine china was the only sound he made. It was a small sound, but in the sudden, echoing silence at their table, it felt like a gavel coming down. He was done eating. He was done pretending. He was finished. 10 years earlier, Curtis had been anything but unfinished. He had been on the precipice of everything. At 24, he held an acceptance letter from the University of Pennsylvania School of Engineering and Applied Science. It was his dream, a tangible paper and ink promise of a different life than the one he'd known, growing up in Olney, where futures were often dictated by circumstance, not ambition. The letter represented a path to becoming a mechanical engineer, to designing the very transit systems he'd spent his life riding. He had saved for years, working 2 jobs since high school, accumulating a nest egg of just over $28,000. It wasn't enough for all 4 years, but it was a powerful start. He remembered the day he told Danica, spreading the letter out on the worn kitchen table of the small duplex he'd just inherited from his grandmother. The house was modest, a simple brick-fronted row home, but it was theirs, and it was paid for. His grandmother, a woman whose wisdom was as sturdy as her cast-iron pans, had left it to him free and clear. "A man needs a place to stand," she'd always said. "The rest you can build?" Danica had read the letter, her eyes wide. Then she'd started to cry. They weren't tears of joy for him. They were tears of despair for herself. Her own dreams of becoming a lawyer felt impossibly distant. Her grades were good, but her family's finances were a wreck, and the idea of taking on 6 figures of debt terrified her into paralysis. "You're going to go off and be this brilliant engineer," she'd sobbed, her head buried in his shoulder, "and I'll just be here, stuck." He held her, his own joy curdling into a knot of guilt. He loved her. He loved the way her mind worked, the way she could argue a point with a fierce intelligence that left him breathless. He believed in her dream as much as he believed in his own. That night, sitting at that worn table, surrounded by the floral wallpaper his grandmother had chosen 30 years prior, he made a decision. He looked at his acceptance letter, the culmination of all his work, and then he looked at the woman he loved, her face streaked with tears, her deep brown skin looking fragile in the dim light. "You go," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You go to law school, I'll work. We have the house, so there's no rent. We can use my savings for your tuition. I can get a good union job with the city, with SEPTA. The benefits are solid. I'll support us while you study. When you're a lawyer, when we're stable, then I'll go back to school. I can do night classes." He deferred his admission. Penn was gracious, offering him a 5-year window to reconsider. Drexel offered an even more flexible deferred admission to their night engineering program. He tucked the letters away in a fireproof box with his grandmother's deed. It felt like planting a seed that he would tend to later. He had no idea he was burying it. The next 10 years were a blur of grease, sweat, and sacrifice. He got the job as a bus mechanic for the city. The pay was decent, starting at $42,000 and slowly climbing to the $49,000 he made now. The work was grueling. He spent his days in a cavernous garage in South Philly, the air thick with the smell of diesel and solvent, wrestling with engines the size of refrigerators. He came home with his hands stained black, the kind of grime that never fully washed out from under his fingernails. But he was a good mechanic. He was meticulous, patient. He found a quiet satisfaction in diagnosing a complex electrical problem or rebuilding a failing hydraulic system. He treated each bus as a puzzle, and he was proud of his work. He was keeping the city moving, connecting people to their jobs, their families, their lives. All his energy, all his resources flowed in one direction: Danica. He paid the first semester's tuition at Temple's undergraduate program with a cashier's check for $7,800 drawn directly from his savings account. The next semester was another $7,950. He kept every receipt, every bank statement, in the same fireproof box as the deed. He packed her lunches in the morning before he left for his 6 a.m. shift. He'd make her coffee, leaving it in a $30 thermos on the counter. He did the oil changes on her 2010 Honda Civic himself, saving them the $80 fee at the local shop. He learned to cook, making hearty $25 stews and casseroles that could last them for days. Their life was built on his labor, and the foundation was the simple, unshakable belief that they were a team. When she got into Penn Law 3 years later, the financial demands escalated exponentially. The tuition was a staggering $55,000 a year. His savings were long gone. "We'll need loans," she'd said, her face pale as she looked at the acceptance packet. "But my dad will co-sign. He has the credit for it. Don't you worry about it." Curtis trusted her. He picked up every overtime shift he could get. While she was buying $400 textbooks on torts and civil procedure, he was putting off buying the new pair of $150 Red Wing work boots he desperately needed, his old ones held together with duct tape. When her laptop died in the middle of her second year, he didn't hesitate. He went to the Apple store and put a brand new $1,200 MacBook Air on his credit card, a card he was still paying down with an 18% interest rate. For her, nothing was too much. She was the investment. He was just the capital. And he had no idea how wrong he was. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion, a gradual chilling of the warmth that had once defined their home. The first 2 years of law school were hard, but they still felt like a team. It was in her third and final year that the cracks began to show, widening into fissures he could no longer ignore. The change was personified by her new wardrobe. "I need to look the part for these networking events, Curtis," she explained one evening, pulling a sleek black blazer from a shopping bag. It was from Theory, a brand he'd never heard of. It cost $600. "It's all about presentation. It's not just about grades." He was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to scrub the grease from his hands with a coarse, orange-scented soap. He looked at the blazer, then at his own worn work clothes, and nodded. "Of course, honey. Whatever you need." He took another overtime shift that weekend, working a double on a Saturday to fix a fleet of buses with faulty brakes. The extra $440 before taxes would cover most of it. Soon, there were more networking events, more study groups that ran late into the night. She started talking about her classmates, their summer internships at prestigious firms in New York, their parents who were partners at law firms or federal judges. Her stories were filled with names of restaurants he'd never been to, and vacation spots he'd only seen in magazines. One Tuesday night, he decided to surprise her. He'd made her favorite, a rich beef chili that cost $30 in ingredients and took 3 hours to simmer. He carefully packed it in a container, grabbed a piece of cornbread, and drove the 2012 Toyota Camry to Penn's campus. He found her in the law school's library, not alone in a carrel as he'd pictured, but at a large table with a group of 4 other students. They were all impeccably dressed. Their laughter was loud and confident. On the table, beside their sleek laptops, were several designer handbags, a $3,000 Yves Saint Laurent tote, a Gucci crossbody. He approached the table, holding the bag with the chili. "Hey, honey, I brought you dinner. Figured you were hungry." Danica looked up, and her smile was instant and bright, but her eyes were mortified. "Curtis, what are you doing here?" she hissed under her breath, standing up and pulling him aside. "I told you I was in a study session." "I just wanted to bring you something to eat," he said, confused. Her friends were watching, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and condescension. One of them, a blonde girl with a severe haircut, looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his faded jeans and the faint smell of industrial soap that clung to him. "This is my husband, Curtis," Danica said to the group, her voice strained. She didn't invite him to sit. She didn't introduce him to anyone by name. She took the food from him as if it were a package she was signing for. "Thanks, baby. This is so sweet. But we're really in the middle of something." It was a dismissal, clear and cold. He drove home to the Olney duplex, the smell of chili filling the car, and ate his own dinner alone at the kitchen table. He felt a profound sense of shame, but he couldn't articulate why. He had just been trying to do something nice. He was being supportive. But in that gleaming cathedral-like library, surrounded by the children of privilege, his support suddenly looked clumsy and unwelcome. It looked poor. The public humiliations grew more frequent, more pointed. At a family barbecue at her parents' sprawling home in Gladwin, a $2.5 million stone manor that always made him feel like he should be using the service entrance, her father cornered him by the grill. "So, Curtis," Vernon said, swirling a glass of what was probably very expensive bourbon, "Danica tells me you're still tinkering with those buses. A man needs ambition, you know, a plan." Curtis kept his eyes on the burgers he was flipping. "The job pays the bills, Vernon. It's honest work." "Honest, yes," Vernon conceded, as if it were a minor virtue. "But is it fulfilling? Don't you want more?" Before Curtis could answer, Danica walked over, linking her arm through her father's. She'd overheard. "Daddy, be nice," she said, with a light, tinkling laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Someone has to keep the city moving for the rest of us." She meant it as a deflection, a way to smooth over her father's condescension, but the words landed like a slap. The rest of us. She had drawn a line, placing herself and her father on one side, and him on the other. He wasn't part of us anymore. He was the help. He was the guy who fixed the bus. Later that night, as they were driving home in his Camry, the silence in the car was heavy. "You know," she said finally, looking out the window at the passing city lights, "he has a point in a way. You have to admit, it's not exactly a career, it's a job." She delivered the word job, as if it were a diagnosis, as if it were something to be ashamed of. He thought of his hands, calloused and stained. He thought of the intricate engine schematics he could read like a novel. He thought of the pride he felt when a bus he'd worked on pulled smoothly out of the depot, and he realized with a sickening lurch that she didn't see any of that. She just saw the grease. The final, irrevocable piece of the puzzle clicked into place 6 months before her graduation. Danica had been acting strangely for weeks. Secretive phone calls she'd taken in the other room, a new perfume she wore that smelled like money, and a general air of distraction. He was looking for a spare battery in the back of their shared closet when his hand brushed against a shoebox tucked away on the top shelf. It wasn't his. Curiosity, a feeling he rarely indulged, got the better of him. He pulled it down. Inside, nestled among some old papers, was a stack of credit card statements for a card he didn't know she had, a Visa signature card, in her name only. He sat on the edge of their bed, the bed he'd assembled himself with a $40 Allen key set, and began to read. The statements told a story of a life he was not a part of. There was a charge for $780 at Vernick Fish, a high-end seafood restaurant, on a night she had supposedly been at a late-night study marathon. There was a weekend charge for $1,250 at the Lodge at Woodlock, a luxury spa resort in the Poconos, from a month when she claimed to be on a university-sponsored retreat. There were dozens of smaller charges, $150 lunches, $200 bar tabs, a $500 shopping spree at the King of Prussia Mall. He felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't just the money, it was the elaborate, sustained deception. He was working 60-hour weeks, eating overtime shifts like they were candy, to fund a life she was living with someone else. The shame he'd felt in the library returned, but this time it was mixed with a cold, hard rage. He didn't confront her. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Never fight a fire with gasoline. Fight it with water, quiet and steady. An open confrontation would lead to tears, denials, and probably, somehow, him apologizing. He needed something more than accusations. He needed facts. He needed a plan. The next morning, Curtis called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. He told his supervisor he had a stomach bug, his voice convincingly weak. In reality, he felt a steely resolve he hadn't known he possessed. He spent the morning at the local branch of his credit union, the place where he'd opened his first savings account as a teenager. He requested copies of every statement from the past 10 years. The branch manager, a kind woman named Maria, who had known his grandmother, printed them for him without question. He laid them out on the kitchen table, The same table where he'd made his fateful promise to Danica. He traced the withdrawals with his finger. The first big one? $7,800 10 years ago. The note on the transfer read Temple U tuition, then another and another. A steady bleed over 4 years until his $28,000 savings account, the one he had so carefully built, was completely empty. The account was closed 8 years ago. Seeing the zero balance on the final statement felt like a punch to the gut. His next step was a phone call he should have made years ago. His union, the Transport Workers Union Local 234, offered its members a legal services plan. For a small monthly fee deducted from his paycheck, he had access to a network of attorneys for consultations. He found the number in his benefits pamphlet and dialed. He was referred to a family law attorney in Center City named Anya Sharma. Her office was on the 18th floor of a glass tower overlooking City Hall. It felt a world away from the grease-stained floors of the bus depot. Ms. Sharma was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a handshake as firm as a wrench. Her fee was $450 an hour, a sum that made him flinch, but he knew he couldn't do this alone. He laid out his story, his voice low and even. He told her about the promise, the drained savings, the overtime shifts, the hidden credit card bills. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He just stated the facts as he knew them. Ms. Sharma listened patiently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When he was finished, she looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Williams," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "you are what we call in the legal world a financially disadvantaged spouse. You have made significant contributions to your wife's education and earning potential at the direct expense of your own. The courts recognize that." She then asked the crucial question. "You said your wife told you her father was co-signing the loans for law school. Have you ever seen any of this paperwork?" "No," Curtis admitted. "I trusted her. She handled all of it." "I see," Ms. Sharma said, her pen tapping on the pad. "We need to see that paperwork. We also need any and all documentation of your financial contributions. Bank statements, credit card bills, showing purchases made for her benefit, books, a laptop, anything. And most importantly, we need the deed to your house." "It was my grandmother's," Curtis said. "She left it to me. My name is the only one on it." Anya Sharma's expression sharpened. "That is very good news, Curtis. Very good. That house is your separate, pre-marital property. It is not a marital asset. Do you have the deed?" "Yes," he said. "It's in a fireproof box at home." "Good," she said. "Here's what I want you to do. Do not confront her. Do not let her know you suspect anything. You need to continue acting as the supportive husband until her graduation. After she has graduated, but before she is admitted to the bar, is our window of maximum leverage. I want you to find those loan documents, check her school files, her laptop, anywhere she might keep important papers. The guarantor's signature is the key." He left her office feeling strangely empowered. The $450 consultation fee felt like the best money he had ever spent. He had a strategy. He was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of lies. He was a man with a plan, gathering his weapons. He went home and opened the old fireproof box. He pulled out the deed, its paper thick and yellowed with age. He looked at his grandmother's elegant signature at the bottom. He then pulled out his own deferred admission letters, one from Penn, one from Drexel. They were still valid. They were a promise he had made to himself, a promise he was finally ready to keep. He put everything into a new, waterproof folder. He was building his case, piece by methodical piece. He was a mechanic, after all. He knew how to take things apart, see how they worked, and put them back together the right way. Graduation day arrived, bathed in the brilliant, almost too bright sunshine of late May. The ceremony was held at the Kimmel Center, its soaring glass atrium filled with the excited chatter of thousands of graduates and their proud families. Curtis sat in his assigned seat, the fabric of his $189 suit feeling coarse against his skin. He felt a strange detachment from the scene, as if he were watching a movie of someone else's life. Danica was down on the floor with the other graduates, a sea of black robes and joyful faces. When her name was called, Danica Williams, Juris Doctor, cum laude, a wave of applause went through the crowd. Her father, Vernon, sitting 2 seats down from Curtis, stood up and cheered, his face beaming with proprietary pride. Curtis clapped along with everyone else, his hands moving mechanically. He felt a flicker of the pride he was supposed to feel. The pride he had worked 10 years to earn the right to feel, but it was a pale, watery thing, tainted by the bitter knowledge of her deceit. After the ceremony, they were all swept up in a tide of hugs and photographs on the plaza outside. Danica, radiant and triumphant, her cap held aloft, found him in the crowd and threw her arms around him. "We did it, baby," she exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. She clutched her graduation program in her hand, rolled up like a diploma. "We actually did it." "You did it, Danica," he said, his voice quiet. "You worked hard." She hugged him tighter, and in that moment, as she pressed against him, the rolled-up program she was holding slipped from her grasp. It fell to the pavement, landing right beside his left shoe, a simple, black leather dress shoe he'd bought at DSW for $120 just for this occasion. He bent down to pick it up. As he did, a single sheet of paper, folded into quarters and tucked inside the program, fluttered out. It was a crisp, white, business-sized sheet, different from the glossy pages of the program. He picked it up too. His intention was to simply tuck it back inside, but his fingers registered the familiar texture of official university letterhead. He unfolded it. His heart stopped. It was a consolidated student loan statement from the University of Pennsylvania Bursar's office. His eyes scanned the page, his mind processing the information with the cold, diagnostic precision of a mechanic troubleshooting a faulty engine. Borrower, Danica Williams. Loan type, graduate plus loan. Academic year, 2021 to 2022. Amount, $29,180. Academic year, 2022 to 2023. Amount, $29,180. Academic year, 2023 to 2024. Amount, $29,180. Total principal balance, $87,540. The number was staggering, but it wasn't what made the world go silent. It was the section at the bottom of the page. A small box labeled Guarantor Information. Inside the box was his name, his address, and his social security number. And on the line for the signature, a sloppy, looping scrawl that was a crude imitation of his own handwriting. It was there for every loan, every semester. He had not just paid for her undergraduate degree with his savings. He was now on the hook, legally and financially, for a debt nearing 6 figures. A debt he hadn't even known existed. She hadn't just lied to him. She had committed fraud. She had used his good name, his solid credit, the credit of a man who paid every bill on time, every single month, to secure her future while systematically destroying his. The joyful sounds of the celebration around him faded into a dull, distant roar. The bright sunlight seemed to dim. He could feel the weight of the paper in his hand, a single sheet that weighed more than a decade of his life. He looked up at Danica, who was smiling for a photo with her father, completely oblivious. She was a stranger to him. He carefully, precisely, folded the loan statement back into its original quarters and slipped it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. It lay against his chest like a block of ice. He then rolled up the program and handed it back to her with a placid smile. "Here you go," he said. "You dropped this." His voice was perfectly normal. His hand was perfectly steady. But inside, something had irrevocably broken, and in its place something cold and hard and clear was beginning to form. Justice. The hour between the discovery and the celebratory dinner was the longest hour of Curtis's life. He was a man playing a part, a ghost haunting the edges of his own tragedy. He had to feign normalcy, to smile and nod, and act the part of the proud, supportive husband, while the fraudulent document in his pocket burned against his chest. Every word of praise he offered Danica was a lie, a carefully constructed piece of the facade he was maintaining for just a little while longer. "I'm so proud of you, honey," he said as they walked to the parking garage, his arm around her shoulders. The gesture felt alien, like he was moving someone else's limb. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. Her words, once the bedrock of their shared dream, now sounded like a cruel joke. He wondered if she'd ever meant them at all. The drive from University City to the main line was a masterclass in strategic restraint. Danica was giddy, electric with triumph. She talked nonstop, outlining her future as if it were a legal brief. She had the job offer from the prestigious firm, a starting salary of $190,000. She talked about the apartment they could get in Rittenhouse Square, the vacations they could take to Italy or Greece. She was planning a life he now knew he would never be a part of, a life funded by his labor and her lies. "Isn't this amazing, baby? We did it," she said, reaching over to squeeze his hand as he drove his 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it. The car suddenly felt shabby, a relic from a life she was rocketing away from. "We did it," Curtis repeated, his voice a flat echo. He kept his eyes on the road, his grip tight on the worn steering wheel. He felt nothing, not rage, not sadness, just an unnerving, profound emptiness. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane, the quiet moment before the world is torn apart. As they approached their neighborhood in Olney, he made a calculated detour. "I need to run into the house for a minute," he said, his tone casual. "I want to grab a different jacket. This one's a little tight." "Curtis, we're going to be late," Danica complained, checking her reflection in the visor mirror. "Richard is meeting us there." "It'll only take a second," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He parked in front of their duplex, the familiar brick facade looking like a stage set. He went inside alone, the air in the house thick with the ghosts of a decade of shared life. He walked past the living room where they'd watched countless hours of television on their modest $400 Vizio TV. He walked past the kitchen where he'd cooked hundreds of meals. He went straight to the bedroom, to the closet where his fireproof box was hidden. He didn't grab a different jacket. He reached into the back of the closet, behind a stack of old sweaters, and retrieved the waterproof document folder he had prepared weeks ago with Ms. Sharma. Inside was the original deed to the house, the bank statements showing the transfer of his life savings, his own deferred admission letters, and a crisp business card for Anya Sharma, attorney at law. He slipped the folder inside the jacket he was already wearing. It felt solid and heavy, a counterweight to the fraudulent paper in his other pocket. He took a deep breath, looking around the room one last time. He saw her things, her expensive perfumes on the dresser, a pair of $800 Jimmy Choo shoes peeking out from under the bed, a gift from her father. They were artifacts from a life she had built on his back. He felt a flicker of anger, but he pushed it down. Emotion was a liability now. He needed the cold, clean precision of a mechanic. He was just disconnecting a faulty part. He walked back out to the car, his face an unreadable mask. "Okay, all set," he said, getting back behind the wheel. Danica was touching up her lipstick. "Finally," she sighed. not looking at him. "Let's go. I don't want to keep Richard waiting." The name hung in the air. Richard, the mentor. He now understood that Richard was not a new development. The $780 dinner, the $1,250 spa weekend, that was Richard. He was the co-conspirator, the man who enjoyed the fruits of Curtis's labor, and in just a little while, he was going to meet him. Curtis put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving his old life behind him in the rearview mirror. He was driving toward the end, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was in control. The strike was not a loud affair. It was quiet, precise, and utterly devastating. The scene was the opulent dining room of Vernick Table, where the combined net worth of the patrons could likely have solved a small country's debt crisis. Their table was a small island of tension in a sea of relaxed wealth. Vernon had just delivered his insult, the word unfinished, landing with the soft thud of a coffin lid closing. Curtis had placed his fork down. The silence that followed was charged. Curtis broke it, his voice calm and measured, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "You know, Vernon," he said, looking directly at his father-in-law. "You're right. I did leave something unfinished." He reached into the inside pocket of his JCPenney suit jacket, the one Danica had called perfectly adequate, and pulled out the waterproof folder. The plastic crinkled softly, a sound that seemed to suck all the air from the table. Richard, the lawyer boyfriend, paused with a wine glass halfway to his lips, a flicker of professional curiosity in his eyes. Danica watched Curtis's hands, a knot of confusion tightening her brow. Curtis placed the folder on the pristine white tablecloth. He opened it and slid the first document across the table toward Danica. It was the deed to the house on Olney Avenue. "This," Curtis said, his voice devoid of emotion, "is the deed to the house you've been living in for the past 10 years. It was my grandmother's. She left it to me, and only me, before we were even married. It is paid off, and my name is the only one on it." Danica stared at the document. Her smile, which had been plastered on since they arrived, finally dissolved. "Curtis, what is this?" "It's a legal document," he said, simply. He then turned his attention back to Vernon. "It's proof of ownership. It means that the home Danica lives in is my separate, non-marital property. It's the first thing I finished." He reached back into the folder. This time, he pulled out a sheaf of papers. They were the bank statements from his old savings account, the ones the credit union manager had printed for him. He fanned them out like a poker hand. "These are the statements from the college fund I saved for 10 years, working 2 jobs. You can see the balance here in 2014 was just over $28,000. And you can see the withdrawals, semester by semester, to pay for Danica's undergraduate degree at Temple, until the balance was 0. He tapped the final statement. "That was the second thing I finished." Vernon was sputtering, his face turning a blotchy red. "What is the meaning of this? This is highly inappropriate." Curtis ignored him. He saved the final, most damning piece of evidence for last. He reached into his other pocket, the one holding the folded loan statement he'd found at the graduation. He unfolded it and placed it directly in front of Danica, on top of the deed. "And this," he said, his voice dropping to an almost whisper, "is the thing you finished." Danica looked down. Her eyes scanned the page. He watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. He saw the moment her brain registered the total balance, $87,540. He saw the flicker of panic as her eyes darted to the bottom of the page, to the guarantor box. He saw her face drain of all color, leaving her luminous brown skin looking ashen under the restaurant's expensive lighting. She went white. "These," Curtis continued, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, "are the student loan documents for the law degree we are celebrating tonight. The degree I was told your father was co-signing for. But his name isn't on here, is it? Mine is. My signature, forged, on every single one." He looked at Richard, the lawyer, whose easy smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, professional horror. "I believe the legal term for that is fraud. And since the loans were obtained fraudulently, the university, and by extension the American Bar Association, will have a significant interest. A law degree conferred on the basis of financial fraud is not a valid degree. It will be withheld, pending a full investigation and repayment of the funds. By her." The devastation was total. In the space of 30 seconds, Curtis had dismantled her entire world. Her degree was a ghost. Her six-figure job offer was about to evaporate, and the house she lived in was no longer her home. Richard, the lawyer, was the first to react. He understood the implications instantly. His career, his reputation, his standing at his firm. It was all at risk. Being associated with this, even peripherally, was poison. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. "I have to go," he said, his voice tight. He didn't look at Danica. He didn't make an excuse. He simply turned and walked away, a man fleeing the scene of a crime. Danica finally looked up at Curtis, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Tears began to well, spilling down her cheeks. "Curtis, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. We can fix this." "There is no we," Curtis said, the finality in his voice absolute. "I sacrificed my dream for yours. I worked my body to the bone for you, and you repaid me with theft, deceit, and humiliation. You stood by and let your father call me unfinished, in front of the man you were cheating on me with." He stood up, his own suit no longer feeling tight. He felt light. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a single, crisp $100 bill, placing it on the table to more than cover his untouched meal and a glass of water. "The locks on the house will be changed tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp," he said, his voice as cold and hard as the marble floor. He pulled Miss Sharma's business card from the folder and placed it on the table next to Danica's trembling hand. "You can arrange with my lawyer to retrieve your personal belongings. She will be in touch with the university and the loan servicer in the morning." He looked at Vernon, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at Danica, who was now openly sobbing. He felt nothing. The rage was gone. The hurt was gone. There was only a vast, quiet emptiness. "I'm finished now," he said. And he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the wreckage of their lives behind him on a pristine white tablecloth. He didn't look back. The fallout was not a storm, but a swift and silent demolition. The consequences cascaded, each one a direct and unavoidable result of the choices Danica had made. Curtis didn't need to do anything else. He had simply set the truth in motion, and the truth did its own work. The first signs of the collapse came in a series of frantic voicemails left on his phone, which he listened to once before, forwarding them to his lawyer. Voicemail 1, left at 10:17 p.m., the night of the dinner. Danica's voice, thick with tears and panic. "Curtis, pick up the phone. You can't be serious. We can talk about this. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake. Just call me back." Voicemail 2, left at 11:42 p.m. The pleading had curdled into anger. "You think you can just throw me out? After everything, I have rights. This is my home too. I'll sue you, Curtis. I swear to God I will." Voicemail 3, left at 2:03 a.m. The anger had collapsed into desperate, raw pleading. "Okay, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It was wrong. I know it was wrong. I'll pay you back, every penny, I swear. Just please. Please don't tell the school. They'll take everything away. Please, Curtis, don't ruin my life. But her life was already ruined. She had ruined it herself. The following Monday at 9 a.m., Ms. Anya Sharma sent a registered letter to the Dean of Penn Law and a formal fraud affidavit to the university's bursar's office and the federal loan servicer. The letter was a masterpiece of legal precision, outlining the forgery of the guarantor's signatures and including copies of the loan statement and Curtis's sworn testimony. The consequences were immediate and severe. 1 week later, the loan servicer placed the entire $87,540 debt into administrative forbearance and launched a formal fraud investigation. This immediately flagged Danica's file within the university system. 2 weeks later, Danica received a summons to appear before the university's honor council. Vernon, attempting to intervene, hired a high-powered $1,200 an hour attorney from a top Philadelphia firm. The attorney advised him that their position was untenable. The evidence of forgery was clear, and Curtis's documentation of his financial support created a devastating narrative. Vernon's offer to simply pay off the loan was rejected. It was no longer about the money, but about the academic fraud and ethical violations. 1 month later, the Honor Council delivered its verdict. Danica was found guilty of acts of dishonesty that compromised the integrity of the academic community. The law firm that had offered her the $190,000 a year job received a discreet call from the university's career services office. The offer was formally rescinded the next day, citing the results of their ongoing background check. 6 weeks later, the final crushing blow. A formal letter from the office of the dean arrived at her parents' address in Gladwin, where she was now living in her childhood bedroom. Her Juris Doctor degree was being held in abeyance, indefinitely, pending the full resolution of the federal fraud investigation. She was not a graduate. She was a pariah. She could not take the bar exam. She could not practice law. She was trapped, saddled with a debt she had no means to pay, and a future that had been reduced to ashes. Richard, the lawyer, had vanished completely. He blocked her number, unfriended her on all social media, and instructed his secretary to tell her he was unavailable if she called his office. His career was his god, and he would sacrifice anyone at its altar. Vernon was perhaps the most broken. His perfect, finished daughter was a disgrace. His money and influence, the tools he had used to build his entire world, were useless against the simple, unassailable truth. He had underestimated the quiet mechanic, the unfinished man, and in doing so, had overseen the complete destruction of his daughter's life. Curtis, meanwhile, felt a quiet sense of peace. He had the locks on the duplex changed, as promised. He packed up all of Danica's belongings himself, the $1,700 dress, the $800 shoes, the expensive perfumes, into 34 cardboard boxes. He arranged for them to be picked up by a moving service paid for by Vernon. When he walked back into the empty house, it felt clean. It felt like his own again. He opened the windows, letting the fresh spring air wash away the last 10 years. 2 years later, the duplex in Olney was transformed. The quiet hum of a late September evening settled over the neighborhood. Curtis sat in his backyard, a space he had turned from a patch of weeds into a thriving garden, with neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. The air smelled of soil and basil, a string of solar-powered cafe lights, a $50 purchase from Home Depot, cast a warm glow over a small patio he'd built himself with $400 worth of pavers. Upstairs, a light was on in the window of the second-floor apartment. A young family, a nurse and a teacher with a small child, lived there now. Their rent, a steady $1,800 a month, went directly into his savings account, providing a comfortable financial cushion he'd never had before. The house was no longer just a place to stand. It was a source of stability and growth. On the patio table in front of him lay a well-worn textbook, Fundamentals of Electrical Engineering. He was in his second year of Drexel's night program. It was challenging, demanding work, but his mind, so long occupied with bus engines and financial worries, felt alive and hungry for the complex equations and theories. He was excelling. For the first time, he was building something for himself, and the satisfaction was a deep, quiet current running through his life. His old 2012 Camry was gone. In its place was a 5-year-old Honda CR-V, a sensible and reliable vehicle he had purchased for $18,500 in cash 6 months ago. His hands were still often stained with grease from his day job, but now, at night, they held pens and calculators. His deep brown skin, luminous in the sunset's glow, was that of a man at peace. He sometimes thought of Danica. He'd heard through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances that she was working as a paralegal at a small suburban law firm. It was the very kind of job she had once openly sneered at, a stepping stone she had deemed beneath her. She was slowly paying down the mountain of debt, her wages garnished, her future as a lawyer a dream that had died. He heard her father had aged a decade in 2 years. Curtis felt no satisfaction in this knowledge, no schadenfreude. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind not a scar but clean, healed tissue. He had forgiven her, not for her benefit, but for his own. Holding on to that bitterness would have been like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. His justice had been about accountability, not revenge. It was about resetting the balance of his own life. He looked at the open textbook, at the complex diagrams of circuits and power systems. He realized that Vernon had been right about one thing. Curtis had been unfinished. He had poured all his resources, all his energy, into completing someone else's dream. He had left his own potential sitting in a box, gathering dust. The painful end of his marriage had been a violent, necessary catalyst. It had forced him to finally pick up his own tools and get to work on himself. True wealth, he now understood, wasn't a degree on a wall, a 6-figure salary, or a house in the right neighborhood. It wasn't about being finished in the eyes of others. True wealth was the quiet dignity of a promise kept to oneself. It was the solid ground of a home you owned, the knowledge in your head that you had earned, and the unshakable peace in your heart that you had fought for and won. He took a deep breath of the cool night air, closed his textbook, and looked up at the first few stars beginning to appear in the Philadelphia sky. He was Curtis Williams. He was a mechanic. He was a student. He was a landlord. He was building a life, his life, piece by methodical piece. And he was finally, truly, on his way to being complete. Have you ever had to make a huge sacrifice for someone you love, only to realize they didn't appreciate it? Let us know your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal.